going to happen. There are a mix of people in the room. Some of you are those that have lived in Milton Keynes historically, which is great. Some of you are based with us here in Northampton, and some of you are new to the area. And so there's a real mix and dynamic of different people in the room. I guess this evening for us, we just wanted to take a moment to just share a little bit of the journey that we've been on that's kind of led us to this point, but also you're going to hear us talk about this thing called a launch team quite regularly. And I guess we want to try and define what we mean by launch team. So that's kind of the agenda for tonight. It's probably a small enough group for us to have some interaction. But for the time being, just going to encourage you to keep your microphones muted. And we're just going to share some stuff that probably going to take about half an hour. Famous last words, 40 minutes. And then we will perhaps create some space to just have a discussion, or if there was any questions or anything like that. If you do want to fire any questions during this time, then send it to the tech PC, and we'll make sure you've got your questions get filtered through. Only worthy questions will make it. No. Sorry, but yeah. So welcome everybody to what is the first Garden City Vision Night. Many of you we've met in different capacities. So some of you we've had coffee. Some of us have swapped messages online. Many of you we know because you're very much part of Central Vineyard, and so it's great to have you with us as well. Tonight is a series, I guess, of events that we would like to host. That really is just our way of trying to kind of gather some people who may want to be part of this process of seeing this new church launched. And so, as I say, we're going to use that term launch team quite a bit, and I'm conscious that that might be a new word to you. It is an intentional word. We're not, and it kind of says what we're trying not to do as much as what we're trying to do. And so we're not trying to build a leadership team. We're not trying to build a core team. This is a launch team. And the purpose of a launch team is to help the church get launched. And so it's not a team that will go on forever, because eventually, we will move into a different phase as a church plant. And so that language of launch is just really helpful because it helps us establish the role that those who may find themselves part of this team, the kind of role that they will be playing. Church planting is an exciting adventure and a challenging prospect. And actually, the intentional steps that we take in this launch phase will shape the kind of church community we eventually establish. That's the reality. And it's also in this launch phase where it feels like we're going to exert the most energy in order to get the church off the ground. It's kind of like trying to get a rocket in orbit. All the energy goes into the launch. Once the rocket is in space, it kind of it survives on its own sense of momentum, and that's kind of what church planting is like, particularly in this front end. As we try and launch things, there's going to be a lot of energy going into this initial phase to kind of get this thing off the ground, in the hope that we can plant a church that is healthy and sustainable for the future. And so I guess the question that we're trying to address tonight is what does it mean to join in with this launch process, and essentially what 10 things do you need to know up front? What 10 things can we tell you that you could possibly expect in this process? What 10 things might you experience as we move along? What 10 things might you want to know as we get ready to launch this church? Obviously, it does feel really strange. We're coming out of the weirdest season of our lives. And so doing this in this format is kind of strange. I know we would have way preferred doing it face to face. But the reality is I think I might have COVID. So unfortunately, we are doing it like this tonight. So 10 things that you need to know up front about the launch of this church plant. The first you might want to know about is what got us here. Why are we here? Why do we feel now at the end of this strange season of our lives? Why do we think now is the time to plant this church? And I guess for us, the story starts a couple of years ago. At the end of 2019, Tammy and I got to celebrate two significant anniversaries. So at the end of 2019, we got to celebrate 20 years of marriage. And then at the beginning of 2020, we also got to celebrate 20 years of being in ministry together. And so for much of our adult lives and all of our married life, we have been involved in pastoral ministry in some form, mostly church planting. And so we kind of, I guess for us, unwittingly kind of reached a bit of to use a sports analogy, we kind of hit a bit of a halftime moment in our life and marriage and ministry and all of those things. We kind of hit this 20-year mark, and you don't hit an anniversary like that without perhaps being reflective. And so some of the questions that we found ourselves stirring in our hearts was like, well, obviously the last 20 years there's been some amazing things to celebrate. God has given us the privilege of being involved in planting a few other churches. We've got 3 amazing daughters who seem to be doing amazingly despite us, and all of those sorts of things. And so we had lots to look back over the last 20 years and be grateful for. But I guess the stirring question in our heart was, what might the next 20 years look like? If we get to serve Jesus for the next 20 years, how would he have us serve him? And so we just began to, I guess, for us, go on a bit of a discerning journey and just began to ask ourselves some searching questions like, what would you have us do, Lord? And I guess we found ourselves in a place where we were open to whatever God wanted to say and whatever he might want to reveal to us in that time. And so back at the start of 2020, which was pre-COVID, we are going to define our lives like that from now on, aren't we? Pre-COVID, post-COVID. But pre-COVID, at the beginning of 2020, I happened to find myself in Milton Keynes, and I think I was in a meeting or something like that, and Tammy messaged me and said, would I go to Central Milton Keynes and pick up some Nespresso coffee pods? So the more you get to know us, the more you'll know that coffee plays an essential role in our lives. But and so there I am walking around Central Milton Keynes aimlessly, because I always get lost there and I refuse to look at a map. But I'm walking around Central Milton Keynes looking for this Nespresso kiosk. And as I'm walking around, I just sense the Lord speak to me in a very kind of real way. I'm not sure it was an audible voice, but it was probably the closest I've experienced to God speaking audibly. And I just felt God say to me, there's an assignment here for you. And hearing those words, walking around the city, I just felt myself being quite overcome. And I had to go and sit down somewhere, and I text Tammy and I said, I haven't got your coffee yet, but I've had this kind of weird encounter with God as I'm walking around Milton Keynes. And I'm sure Tammy thought I was mad.
Well, I always just thought the assignment was to get coffee.
Yeah.
That was it.
But Tammy's response to me was a very godly one. She said, well, if this is God, I'm going to need a burning bush. And so we kind of just, in many ways, we put it down to just me having a weird experience, just this weird encounter with God in Milton Keynes. It must have been the ley lines or something like that, as we walked around the city. But just before lockdown, so when was that? March 2020, just before lockdown, a friend of ours rocks up at our house, and this guy, he lives in the northwest of the country, and he's quite a prophetic guy. He's one of these guys that he kind of reads your mail and just can tell you all sorts of things, and you wonder how that happens. And but anyway, he came to visit us, and he came and he said he had a dream that he wanted to share, that he had about Tammy and I. And so in this dream, he found himself standing over the UK, and as he stood over the UK, he began to get drawn into Northampton, where we are now. And then he said suddenly he was like reading what looked like scrolls, like in the Bible where it talks about the scrolls. He had this kind of imagery of reading scrolls, and these scrolls were telling the story of the church that we lead, Central Vineyard in Northampton. And it was telling the story of all the things that the church had done, but also things that were yet to come, yet to happen. And he said, there was so much more to come. There was so much more for this church to do. But then he said there was a second scroll, and it was the scroll and the story of Steve and Tammy. And he said, he began to read the scrolls, and there was lots of things that had happened, but still lots of things to come. And then he said, but for some reason, the story of Central Vineyard and the story of Steve and Tammy were separating. And he said, and then suddenly he was back standing over the map, and the story of Steve and Tammy moved southeast from Northampton along a street called Watling Street. And so obviously he didn't know the geography too well, but we were quite taken back by that, because all of a sudden God was speaking to someone and directing them and directing us to the very place that we felt God had started to stir something in our hearts.
I think that was quite profound for me, because in Stephen's role of trying to convince me God had spoken, he'd printed off a map of Milton Keynes, he'd taken a highlighter and he'd highlighted Watling Street and said, I think this is the area, along Watling Street, along that canal, this is the area God has called us to. And I was like, yeah, really expensive. And so actually when Kevin spoke, it was that moment where it was like, okay, this is really real. And it was a bit of excitement and a bit of, oh no.
Yeah. And so he left this with us, and then a week later the world went into lockdown. And so we kind of went into lockdown, and we were sitting on this kind of sense that God was speaking, and then really just spent the whole of lockdown just sort of like, okay, God, foolishly saying, will you confirm that this is your will? And so we spent lockdown trying to just really hear from the Lord. And actually, in a number of different environments, as lockdown and coronavirus carried on, the Lord continued to speak in lots of different ways, and through lots of different people who are just totally outside of our situation, and began to speak. And so you know, we got to the stage probably at the start of this year thinking, if we do not act now, then we are being disobedient. The Lord has spoken in some clear and concise ways, in ways that we could never have imagined or have never experienced before. And so we've got to this stage where we're just like, okay, God, we're going to be obedient. We're going to be obedient and we're going to do this. And so obviously we began to share with different people what the Lord was saying and stirring as we kind of broke the news that this is happening earlier this year. And so this has been a prophetic journey for us. It's been a journey of hearing God and just having that sense of assurity that this is what the Lord is saying and doing. You know, John Wimber, one of the founders of the Vineyard movement, often talks about us being like loose change in God's pocket. And he will take that money out of his pocket and spend us how he likes. And we really felt that reality from the Lord as we began to imagine what this next season looks like. And so that might be the first question you've got. How, well, you know, what got us here? The second thing you might want to know about is some things about Milton Keynes. Some of you obviously live there, some of you don't. Some of you are new to the area, but Milton Keynes is a unique city. It's nearly 55 years old. It's the last of those post-war new towns, and it was the only one that was bold enough or had the audacity to call itself a city. As a city, it was built on this mantra of the urban designer Melvin Webber, who talks about community without propinquity, where this idea that community wasn't just defined by proximity or limited to how we understand traditional neighborhood structures. But what he was saying was, with the advancement of technology and transport, that actually we could start to build cities that were based on a web of interactions. And so that's what happened with Milton Keynes. This sprawling grid system across northern Buckinghamshire took place, you know, famously for its dual carriageways and roundabouts. And so it has a unique look and feel, and in many ways its residents, you know, they kind of use this city in a way that's very different to other cities, particularly in the UK. You know, famously, you can get anywhere in the city in 10 or 15 minutes. That's the thing. And so with that unique reality also comes some losses. And so there is a sense that, you know, there are some extreme gaps in the city between affluence and poverty, where the design of the city has perhaps favoured the more well-off and more mobile, and has perhaps discriminated against those who are living in less fortunate circumstances. One piece of research says that 18% of children in the city live in poverty. Another said that could be as much as 32% in some areas. Other reports say that 1 in 4 people experience issues of loneliness and isolation. And as the city continues to grow at an exponential rate, there are a ton of challenges to be addressed around mental health, education, housing. And yet we believe at the heart of this, the local church can make a difference. And it's and you know, the church at its best is there to really play its part in rewriting the story of the city. And we want to try and do that as creatively and as innovatively as we possibly can. If you're interested in understanding more about Milton Keynes, then we've linked 2 videos on our website put together by the Open University called Understanding Milton Keynes, and there's a link there, so gcv.mk/context. So if you want to waste 2 hours of your life, you can watch that. Thirdly, you might want to know something about our vision. We summarize our vision or mission like this: practicing the way of Jesus together for the renewal of the city. And so there's these three strands to our vision. Firstly, we are practicing the way of Jesus. Our goal is to be apprentices of Jesus, where we're learning to order our lives around him. And so we want to live that out in three clear ways: to be with Jesus, to become like Jesus, and to do what Jesus did, or to live our lives as he would live them if he was us. And so as we live that way, we believe that our lives, the communities that we're part of, and the city as a whole can be transformed. That's the age-old call of Jesus's followers, to live transformed lives for the sake of transformation. And so secondly, we want to practice the way of Jesus, and we want to do that in community. We want to do it together. And so we want to look beyond Sunday gatherings or meetings, although those things are important to us, but we want to look towards building community where we're trying to intentionally connect people and families and institutions and businesses to the life-changing reality of Jesus. And we want to do that together. We want to encounter him together in a sense, with a sense of community. And we do this, as I say, for the sake of others, for the transformation and for the renewal of the city. I've already shared some challenging realities that Milton Keynes faces as a city. We don't believe we're called just to build a great church. But we believe we're called to play our part in building a great city. And we believe that if we can do that, we can not just shape a city, but we believe we can shape a whole region and actually create environments where everyone is playing their part in every corner of the city, extending God's kingdom everywhere, every way. And so as we outwork this, our strategy is fairly simple. The church has taken lots of forms throughout the ages, and on a number of occasions throughout the history, the church has reformed. And yet when you look through church history, starting with the book of Acts, the predominant strategy of the church is to be a gathered and scattered community. And so, starting in Acts chapter 2, the church gathered in the temple courts, and then they scattered in one another's homes and other places across the city, as where they grew as disciples of Jesus, doing life together. And so we think, when we think about our strategy, we want to do things that enable us to gather as a community, and things that propel us to be a scattered people as well. And whilst we may have some initial ideas about what that might look like, the truth is the canvas is kind of blank. And as we continue to gather more people, we are confident that some of those rhythms of gathering and scattering will begin to take shape for us. We don't want to be prescriptive at this stage of our journey. We want to try and see what emerges. And then we also believe, and this is one of our core values, we believe in multiplication. And in that, we are convinced that we are not called to just put all our energy and resources in this church alone. Instead, we want to see all that can be achieved in one person or in one group or in one place multiplied. And ultimately, we want to do that through planting new churches. And so we're convinced that church planting is one of the most effective ways for us to reach new people in new communities. And so it's our desire right from the outset of planting this church that we would become a church that plants churches across our region and beyond. Okay, number 4, you might want to know what's going to happen. what's going to happen, what's going to happen this year. And so we've got a bit of a timeline for this year. As I say, it's fairly loose. One of the things that I've realized is that strategic planning no longer works. I don't know if you've noticed that. You can't write a 5-year plan anymore, because no one actually is in control of anything. COVID has taught us, hasn't it, that things can change at a flick of a switch. And so we've just got kind of 4 phases that we kind of see coming in this next year. And so autumn 2021, which is apparently now, we are in this gathering phase. And so our hope and our desire is to gather as many people as possible who might be interested in putting their shoulder to the plow and being part of what we are doing. And we think that by the spring of next year, that we might have gathered enough people with some interest. And so after Easter next year, our plan is to go into this kind of pre-launch phase where we might begin to do some more public things. We might begin to build more of a presence in the city. And then by next summer, Tammy and I and our girls are planning to move. And so we want to be in the city, living in the city by the summer of 2022. And then our hope is that this time next year, we would be ready to launch officially as a church. And so that plan is kind of a loose plan, because things could go faster than we anticipate, and things could also go slower than we anticipate. And so we want to remain flexible. We're not going to kind of just like set this in stone and we're going to do this regardless. We're going to be responsive to what's going on. Okay, we're halfway there. Number 5, you might want to know about the role of the launch team. Those of us called to join the launch team really have an important role to play in setting the tone and kind of forming the culture of the church. You see, who we are as a launch team and what the launch team do and don't do will be reproduced in those who join us. And so the role of the launch team is really to model church. Is to model what church is like. And that means we're modeling a number of different things. First of all, we're modeling being friendly. That sounds profound, doesn't it? But helping others, as others want to come and be part of what we're doing, that largely will depend on how well as a team we embrace them. And so the number 1 goal for the launch team is to be friendly. We want to avoid setting up cliques. We need to be people who are willing to talk to new people when they visit us, going out to dinner with people, going for meals and drinks and stuff like that, learning to include others in the things that we do. I remember when we planted Central Vineyard, we always had this rule, we wanted to do things as a family. Of course we did, but if the thing that we were doing as a family could include someone else, we would always invite someone to just come and be part of that. And so we're looking forward to creating those kinds of environments where each of us can take responsibility at inviting people and being friendly, building relationship and stuff like that. The second thing that we model is worship. In the vineyard, for those of you who are familiar with the vineyard, we have an understanding of worship that's rooted in intimacy and connection to God. And as some people move towards us, the fact is they might not have ever experienced that reality. We had a guy in our service in Northampton this Sunday who's just like never set foot in church before and had no idea what was going on. And as that launch team, we get to model so that other people learn to do what we do. that there's an element to things that we do in church that are caught rather than taught. And not only do we model worship, but we also get to model ministry. You know, some people, again, will come with different experiences. And we believe, you know, in the Vineyard, we believe in everybody gets to minister, everybody gets to play. And so what we do when we pray, what we do when we prophesy, what we do when we encourage people, you know, what we do when we do all these different things will help others grow and move in the same direction. And so, you know, this is an opportunity as a launch team to really model what it means to healthily do ministry well. As a launch team, we get to model servanthood, which in the context of Jesus's kingdom is really what leadership is about. And so we want people to understand that serving is an expected part of being involved. Now, initially, there's not going to be a lot to do. You know, there's not going to be many rotas to start with, thank goodness. But serving wherever we can and wherever's helpful is really important. And as a launch team, there's an invitation to come and serve. The launch team's role is to model what it means to be a disciple, the way we follow Jesus, the way we live out that reality of being with Jesus, becoming like Jesus, doing what Jesus did, the way we use our time, our energy, our money, the way we care for others. They're all ways that we model what it means to be a discipleship. The launch team role is to care for the poor. In the Vineyard, we have this emphasis of compassion and meeting the needs of the poor and the disadvantaged. And you know, in these early stages, we recognize we won't have the resources to do a whole host of things, but we can partner with others. We can partner with others across the city and join in with what's happening and give ourselves and spend ourselves on behalf of the poor. The launch team is there to model mission and outward focusedness. You know, ultimately, we're planting a church because we believe it's the best way to reach people who do not know Jesus. And guess who that is? That's our friends, it's our family, it's our co-workers, it's our neighbors. And we believe planting a new community in a city is the best opportunity we have at reaching some of those people. And then finally, the launch team role is to be gatherers, actively looking for and seeking out new relationships with people not currently involved in church and inviting them to be involved. That this is an opportunity for us to gather people. You know, one of the things when we were planning this event, I think we said to a number of you who signed up, just let everyone know. We don't care who they are, you know, just let everybody know. And we want that culture of being invitational to be right at the heart of what we're doing. Is everyone okay? Number 6 is you might want to understand the context. And by that, I mean a church plant is a very different animal to perhaps an established church or a church that's up and running. What can we expect? I guess you can expect it not to be like what you're expecting it to be. And the truth is, we will likely do things at some stage that cause you to think, well, we never did this back at Central Vineyard, or we never did this back at my real church. And if you are joining us from another vineyard, it will be different. Our vision may look a bit similar and it may have some family likeness, but we inevitably will express things in different ways. In these early days, we won't have the resources that perhaps some of us have been used to in other contexts. You may find yourself kind of like pining for the good old days when you went to a real church. You might get fed up of hearing us repeat some of the basics and some of the foundational things over and over again, because we want to include more and more people. And whatever size this church becomes, it's likely we will be much smaller than what you have been used to. You may have expectations to be involved in a particular area of ministry, but in this new context, it may not be possible for you to be involved in that, or that area of ministry may never exist. And so as we attempt to understand the context, we have to manage our expectations. There is also going to be relational costs. Your social circle, particularly if you were to end up relocating with us, your social circle initially could get smaller. You might experience times of loneliness. For some, being in a new geographical location means we probably won't know as many people. With the church being smaller, there are less people to be friends with. So look around the screen now, you might be stuck with some of us. Moving geographically will separate you from old relationships that will inevitably move on without you. It will take time to build real supportive relationships where you find yourself. As the church grows and as people join us, and some of them may not be familiar with church or the vineyard, some may be de-churched and have a bit of baggage. We will need, as a launch team, to embrace those people, embrace the people that the Lord brings to us, even if we don't immediately relate to them. And the truth is, things may grow slower, or they may grow faster than we expect. And again, that will bring some relational impact. It will have a cost to it relationally. And then the other question is, what are people's relationship to me and Tammy? You know, being members of a launch team has some advantages and some disadvantages. Initially, with just a few of us, Tammy and I are going to be really accessible and present and probably leading in most contexts. This will change quickly. And, you know, as we start to give more time to welcoming new people, and as we give more time to developing leaders, wherever we are relationally now, that inevitably will change. And so as a launch team, we go from this phase where we are relationally tight and relationally connected, but eventually those relationships will change. And depending on where you are and who you are, that will either be better or worse. And
usually better.
Yeah, possibly. And so as more people join us, and access to us as the leaders will change. You know, we just have to be honest about that's a reality. We only have a finite amount of capacity like the rest of us. Number 7, we're getting through these quicker. Pioneer or homesteader. Some of us naturally fall into this camp, which is the camp of pioneer. And as a pioneer, you are excited by new things. You enjoy positive change, and something like a church plant for a pioneer type offers the right kind of challenge and stimulation. Others amongst us are more like homesteaders, and we are happier when we feel like things are predictable. We prefer a sense of stability. Often those of us with homesteader traits are seen as dependable, people who are there for the long haul. And whilst most people don't fall, you know, solely fit into one category, we do probably tend to lean towards one or the other. And the truth is, neither are better than the other. If life was left to the pioneers, you might discover America, but if you're without the homesteaders, you have no organization and no settlements. And so over the long haul, we need both kinds of people. Yet these kind of beginning stages that we're entering into, we all need to be flexible, and we all need to be open to change, because change is an inevitable part of this process. And so the truth is, if you are a pioneering type, and I don't know if you've ever worked out if you are, you will probably find the next year really easy, and the prices that we'll have to pay over this next year, you'll be comfortable with. But we're going to need those homesteaders to come behind us and help organize things, and make sure what we've started is sustainable. And so we need both. And so you might think, oh, I'm probably a homesteader, I've already disqualified myself from being part of this, but you don't have to be disqualified. There's still a role and a part to play. Okay, number 8, you might want to know something about leadership. Being in the launch team is not an automatic appointment to leadership in the future. And someone who wasn't a leader in another context may well become a leader in this one. And likewise, someone who others look to for leadership in another context may not attract a following here. And simply, you know, and likewise, you know, if we got to the stage where we were appointing people to work for the church, this would be true as well. Those kind of appointments, those kind of roles that will emerge in the future are going to be situational. And so being in at the beginning is no way linked to some future promise of appointment or position. And so it's probably best not to have that expectation, or if you do, to realize from the outset that it may not be fulfilled. Moving on quickly, number 9, you might want to know what are the key questions you need to ask yourself. If you are interested in joining this launch team, these are 3 questions that you might want to ask. You might want to write them down. It says, do I believe God has called me to join Garden City? That's a pretty important question. The second question would be, can I follow Steve and Tammy as my leaders, stroke pastors? We pretend to be pastors, as my leaders. And the third question would be, can I handle change? I think those 3 questions, they're fairly searching questions and important questions, because if we answer no to any of those, then the journey that we're about to go on may just be too difficult. And so I would encourage you, you know, as we kind of tout our wares and talk about what we're up to, how can you answer those questions? How are those questions that you can say yes to? And if they are, then maybe God is stirring you and inviting you to be part of this team. And then number 10, the last thing is what if this doesn't work out the way we hoped? Well, if you were to connect with us, and as things move forward, you suddenly realize this isn't for me, then there is no shame in moving back or moving on. You might think, well, if this doesn't work out, does it mean I didn't hear God? And I would say not necessarily. You know, often God will use our experiences to form us into who he wants us to be. That nothing that we do in honest pursuit of God's will is ever wasted. He always uses it. And some people may find, or some people might be so pioneering by nature that the moment we become more organized and more established, they might think they need to move on. And that's okay too. You know, there's value in us having people who may just be part of this team for a season. Sometimes they're referred to as scaffolding, but I think that's a bit crude, calling people scaffolding. But some people may be just here for a season, to be scaffolding, to help us get this thing off the ground. And then for whatever reason, they move on. That doesn't mean to say there's anything wrong with the church or anything wrong with them. You know, we'll only shun them in private. We won't talk about them in public. But I jest. But I guess what I'm saying is that if someone's gonna come and be part of this, it's gonna take a lot of time, energy, and effort, and it's gonna take a lot out of us in this next year to see this church get off the ground. But that would be the same if you were starting anything. You know, if you were starting a business, if you were opening a shop, or whatever it might be, you would give 300% to make sure it got off the ground. And it kind of feels like when you're church planting that you live a little bit unsustainably for a short period of time in order to see something get off the ground. And so they are 10 things that we thought you should know from us tonight. Dale, I don't know if you've got any questions, but if not, we are happy for you to unmute. We can stop recording as well if you like.